are going to go next to Dr. Frank Wilhelm. Professor Wilhelm has a PhD from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada, focused on limnology, the study of lakes. At University of Idaho, he teaches a senior class in limnology, and one aspect of his research program is focused on the dynamics of nutrients and how they lead to algal blooms. Currently, he and his students are interested in understanding and quantifying the role of nearshore disturbances from this phenomenon. Dr. Wilhelm, the mic is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Can you hear me? And is the slide up fine?
It looks good, and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. And as you'll notice, I have a couple of co-authors on my talk. I'll introduce them in a minute. They're my students. Just to give you an outline, so I'm going to go really fast to try and make up some time. Hopefully I don't trip over myself, but we'll give it a go. I've been modifying the slideshow as we push back further and further, although I'm an hour behind everybody. So just give you an outline, talk a little bit about the nearshore, why that's important, cover some of the basics as I've been listening to some of the talks. I think there's a couple of basics missing. And then talk a little bit about our nearshore research, and then provide some preliminary results and then some next steps. So first off, I'd like to acknowledge our funders, especially the many private citizens that have stepped up in terms of funding the work at Payette Lake, and then also allowing us access to their properties. Without those, we wouldn't be able to do this work. Okay, here's the cast of characters that's also on the author list. So Abby and Crystal are undergrads. Abby's finished, Crystal is still with us. And then Heather is directly working at Payette Lake. And then Basile is a student in France that's been working with us. So we've heard before from both governor and then the mayors that for our resource-based industries, they depend on a viable resource. And then for water, that means high quality to support our water-related outdoor recreation, the tourism, and then for the city of McCall, the potable water that draws its drinking water from Payette Lake. So, and this is not by any figment of imagination, good water quality. These are both lakes in northern Idaho, and this harks back to some of what Brian was talking earlier about the HABs. So just to cover some basics, limnologists, we have this need to classify trophic state, and you'll hear people talk about this. So this is a continuum, and this goes from oligotrophic on the left here. That's a term meaning very few nutrients. And a good example of that is Crater Lake, Lake Pend Oreille, and Payette Lake are also in that category. Goes through mesotrophy in the middle, and then ends up at eutrophy on the other end, where the water is very green, excess nutrients. And then I want to just identify what the boundaries are that are identified by limnologists. So here are the trophic state boundaries. So for total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and Secchi depth, those are the three main ones. So total phosphorus is the nutrient that is typically limiting in fresh waters. Chlorophyll A is the green pigment in the algal cells, and then Secchi depth is the depth to which you can see a little disc that's 20 centimeters in diameter. And so these are the ones you really need to concern yourselves about in terms of Payette Lake. And then obviously Cascade Lake is on the other end. And then I provide the references at the bottom that these are based on. So eutrophication then is the presence of excess nutrients that stimulate this aquatic plant growth. And there are two states. On the left, you can see a picture that is macrophyte dominated, so big plants, but very clear water. And then on the right-hand side, you can see turbid water that's really green and doesn't have a lot of macrophytes in it. Both of these are stable states, and they're end members of the spectrum, and lakes can flip between the two, depending what occurs. And that's also an active area of research. And then we have this cultural eutrophication, which is accelerated natural process via human activities. And so what typically takes tens of thousands of years is reduced to tens of years. And you can actually see a noticeable change in your human lifetime. And I'm getting old enough that I can start to see some of my early childhood lakes actually changing, and that's fairly disappointing. And that also, that part of that cultural eutrophication includes the recreation that we impose on lakes and our resources. So if you think about recreational activities and phosphorus, then you see this arc. So you could sit at the side of a lake as a recreational aspect or for meditation, and you're going to have absolutely no impact. You get out, you do some paddle sports, you are out on the lake, you're actually interacting with the resource. And then, you get to boating, so you can have the gentle boating, sailboating, or the mom, dad, family going out to do some fishing, so not a lot of impact. And then you get into this one that's highly controversial. You have the jet skis and the wake boats, where we've now developed technology that allows us to pull 5 to 6 foot wakes behind the boat. And those are much larger than anything our lakes see naturally. And I liken those to mini tsunamis. So here we have the wake boats, the size and type of wake that they pull. And obviously the concern is, one is the direct property damage that results when such large waves come ashore, because Alex will talk next about how long those waves are actually propagated. And then you can see there's also the increase in turbidity, and somehow, somewhere, my slides have turned themselves into a timer. So we have this nearshore area that we're really interested in and what happens in that area. And one of the reasons, so just to define that, nearshore is also called littoral zone, typically, and that is the depth of macrophyte growth. So it's the depth to which light can penetrate, and that allows plants to grow. So that's the fringe around the side of the lake in which we're interested in when we talk about the nearshore. It's also the nursery for all kinds of aquatic life, including macroinvertebrates and then fish. It can also act as a filter. So if you have abundant microphyte growth, if you have inflow to that, that can get mopped up before it hits the lake proper. So very important aspect here. And then there's also this physical buffer where waves that come from lakeshore are actually attenuated as they move into that nearshore if it has these aquatic macrophytes and is an intact nearshore area. One of the other aspects we're interested in is that in large lakes, the first changes that you see occur in the nearshore. And so that's particularly why we're interested in that area. If you look at Payette Lake, then you have an issue of volume here. So the nearshore versus the offshore, the pelagic. So there's monitoring that occurs currently in Payette Lake. That's at the 3 main sites. And unfortunately, I don't have them on this map. But if you look at it, if you turn that map sideways, the nearshore makes up a tiny little fringe of this 300-foot deep lake. And it, Payette Lake is huge. It has a giant volume. And just to give you an idea of that, this is from Paul Wood's study in '97. So here is the depth below the full pool on the y-axis, and then the volume in cubic meters and cubic kilometers across the top. And it has a volume of 0.75 cubic kilometers. So that's a kilometer by a kilometer by a kilometer, and it occupies 0.75 or 3/4 of that space. If you multiply it out, that's 750 million liters, and then billions or cubic meters, and then billions of liters. So the size of that makes it very it's a long time lag before you make changes anywhere before they show up in the monitoring that occurs in the deep part of the lake. So hence we're interested in the nearshore, where you're likely to see some changes occur early on. And the previous authors that I showed actually indicate that for large, deep, and recreationally used lakes, monitoring in the nearshore is actually beneficial. So the goals of the research that we have going on at Payette Lake are: one is directly measure the sediment nutrient resuspension from waves and wakes. And then we also want to separate what's wave caused and what's wake caused. And here I'll just pause for a minute and look at what waves are. So waves are naturally occurring disturbances in the nearshore that occur as a result of natural phenomena. And this is primarily wind. And then wakes, on the other hand, are the result of anthropogenic activities, that we impose on the resource. And obviously these include all forms, manners of our interactions with the water and on the water. Okay, and then we're also interested in estimating loads in the nearshore. And what do we mean by loads? That's the mass basically of material that's moved in or added to a lake. And if you have this cartoon here, if you take a water sample here, we analyze that water sample, and from that we get a concentration. And that is mass per unit volume. And if we take that and multiply it by the volume in liters here, then you can see the liters cancel, and that leaves us with the mass or the load in micrograms in some unit of mass. And so that's what I mean by load when we look at, or we're trying to estimate what the loads are to the water body. And then the other goal is to provide usable data for decision makers so that they can make informed decisions that are based on science. So we're really interested in how much phosphate is liberated. And then the question, obviously, the secondary question is, should we worry about that? And so the questions are, what are the types of disturbances that occur, the frequency at which they occur, what is the shoreline type that these disturbances interact with? Are there differences among shoreline types? And then finally, what is protective of water quality in the long term? And so on Payette Lake here on the left, Heather has picked 7 study sites where we're monitoring the activity, the wave activity, waves and wakes in detail over the course of 2 years. We're about a field season into that. And then at Lake CDA, we've done some work in Kidd Island Bay, and then Crystal's working at the outflow of the lake right at the Highway 95 bridge. Okay, so the first question is erosion measurements, how much material is actually moving? And Heather gets to play with some really nice equipment here. So this is a 3D scanner, laser scanner. It's the light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. And we're using that to very accurately measure the shoreline. So this thing sends out pulses of light, and it allows us to scan the shoreline. And here's what it looks like when it's set up, and it automatically rotates, it levels itself, and it rotates and gets us this point cloud. And this is what this looks like. Even though this looks like a grainy black and white, each one of those, there's tens of thousands of points on here, and each point is at sub-millimeter accuracy. So by doing these repeatedly, we can look at how much material is being lost or how much is being accreted. So on the erosion end, some homeowners have shared some incredible stories with us. The second step here used to be at the beach. So you can see there's a good 2 feet missing underneath that. And then other owners have shared with us some of the damage that's occurring where their patios are collapsing as a result of erosion. So we're interested in, when that material is moving, is it moving into the lake? And if it does, how much nutrient is it releasing into the water column? Then there's the other end of it, and that's actual accretion. So that's the accumulation of material. We had the landowner share this picture with us where you can see the rock here in a 1987 photo. And then if you look forward, this is the same picture in 2020. And right here is that same rock. So there's a detail of it. So you can see all of that sand has been naturally accreted onto that shoreline over the last 30 years or so. So the question is, as that material moves, does it move offshore or does it move along the shore? Our main concern is when it's in the water column, how much is it releasing? How much nutrient is it contributing? And how much is being released as it's moving? So we undertake a host of water sampling. There's Heather on the top left, taking samples, manual samples. We take automated samples. And then Crystal working, Heather does exactly the same thing. Take a water sample, we get the turbidity or the cloudiness as these wakes come by. We also play with some level loggers, and these are really accurate ways to measure changes in water depth. So on the y-axis is the water depth, and then across the x-axis is the time of day. And this is some data from Crystal. Starts at 7 in the morning, and you can see all day long, this thing till 2100 or 9 o'clock at night, this thing is busy, right? All of those ups and downs are individual boats and wakes coming by. And then lo and behold, after 9 o'clock, when it gets dark, it flatlines. And then all we're seeing is the natural background disturbance of the waves caused by wind or general breezes lapping up on the shoreline overnight. So huge differences between day and night. And then we're doing this year round because we need to capture times when we have waves, we have wind, and then when we have wakes, and then when the boats are actually separated. So this is in late September or middle of September, and it allows us to actually see individual boats and what their effect is on the shoreline. So these are the types of data that we're gathering to try and tease apart the wave activity and the human-caused wake disturbances. Okay, so here you can see some wind-generated turbidity. This is down at Payette Lake. Right here, you can see some cloudiness in the water, and that's the result of wakes coming ashore. And we're interested in how does that occur and how do different substrates interact with wind waves to create this turbidity. And then the boat-generated turbidity, this up in Lake Coeur d'Alene, looks something like this. We have the same sort of pictures from Payette Lake, where you get that cloudiness moving out into the water column as a result of boats going by repeatedly. This is a plot of turbidity, or the amount of cloudiness in the water on the y-axis, as a function of the time of day of the over the course of the day. So it starts at 5 o'clock in the morning and it goes to night, and every time, every 15 minutes, we take samples and then we look at what happens in response to this high human activity. And as you can see, over the time of the day, that turbidity starts to increase and it never really settles down. It settles down right around lunchtime, but it doesn't come back to background levels. And then you can see when people get off work and later into the evening on long summer nights, that turbidity really increases. So our question then is, what are the nutrients that are released from that? And that's shown here. We have total phosphorus on the y-axis in micrograms per liter, and then turbidity in turbidity units across the bottom. So the turbidity that you see here that's generated, that gets translated into the phosphorus that's released. And the red line indicates the eutrophy line. So you can see as those boats go out and come by, those wakes come ashore, that turbidity increases over time. And then it also increases the total phosphorus. And we have a fairly good relationship here that is explanatory, so that total phosphorus can be predicted by turbidity. Okay, so currently we're looking at the 2020 water samples. Both Crystal and Heather are very busy in the lab currently analyzing the samples they collected. Heather's also busy analyzing the LiDAR scans. And then we're planning for the 2021 field season, and encourage you to stay tuned. We'll have more results later on. And then I won't take any wind out of Alex's sails. He'll look at the mechanics of the wakes in the water, and he'll have that in his presentation next. The best example and the overriding message I guess I'd like to leave you with is the slogan from Bonner County that they developed as part of the Lakes Commission up there, is this: avoid the shore and ride the core. And that's sometimes difficult to do, but especially with these large wakes that are being generated, wakes the size that our lakes never see naturally, is keep it away from the shore. And then with that, I hope I've made up some time, and happy to take any questions, engage in a discussion. Like I say, we're in the first year of the study, and we're still busy analyzing our samples from last year, but again, happy to entertain questions and see if I can answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Wilhelm.